You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and federally certified veteran-owned small business. I'm your host, Robert Bain, along with our producer, Chris Spangle. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact us at chris@leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest today, award-winning historian Tim McGrath. I could read all his awards, but that would be the entire podcast. But I will say he is the winner of the Samuel Eliot Morrison Award for Naval Literature and two-time winner of the Commodore John Barry Book Award. Speaking of people we've had on the podcast, Mr. McGrath, one of them is Craig Simons, who I think is beyond brilliant.
Oh, goodness. They don't come better.
No.
And call me Tim.
Thank you, sir, very much. We are discussing today his new book, Three Roads to Gettysburg, Meade, Lee, Lincoln, and the battle that changed the war, the speech that changed the nation. Thank you very much, Tim, for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, I won't bury the lead. Why another book on Gettysburg?
It initially wasn't going to be another book on Gettysburg. We had been approached by my agent and my editor at the time, Brent Howard at Penguin, about doing a biography on General Meade. So I dove into looking at it, and it was intriguing, and I found that a wonderful historian, Dr. Jennifer Murray, has been working for quite some time on what will probably be the definitive biography of George Meade. And I was like, not going to compete with that. But I was interested, always as a history major who was not a good student, but the decisions that leaders made, individuals made, and what the consequences were. And that led me to going back to our editor and to Jim Donovan, our agent, and just saying, can we do one on all three? It won't be a in-depth biography of all three. It won't be a minute-by-minute count of Gettysburg, such as Dr. Gelzo's book or Stephen Sears, but we can tell enough of the story to say, how did these guys get there, and what were their repercussions of their actions?
Did you have a favorite book, or do you still have a favorite book on Gettysburg before you headed into this? Like, this book can only be half as good as.
Certainly, Dr. Gelzo's, I think, was that really nice combination of informative and very entertaining. Stephen Sears is also, and then I would also go back being in my 70s to the books that introduced me to reading about the Civil War from Bruce Catton.
Yeah.
And while they were never in as much detail on each particular battle, what a storyteller! And I still have my paperbacks to return to.
A Stillness at Appomattox. Yep. I don't know that's never been surpassed in my view.
No, that Never Call Retreat. They're terrific.
Gettysburg is often lauded as, or argued as, the most important battle of the war. You call it the battle that changed the war. How did this battle change the war?
I'll get into that, but I'm forgetting, as we mentioned, Craig Simons. His pictorial history of Gettysburg is also phenomenal. Great writing and accompanied by a wonderful list of maps, illustrations, and paintings and photographs.
He's got the Midas touch, doesn't he?
He does, but he's also a great guy. He was helpful with each and every book.
Did you read his a biography of Nimitz?
Yes.
Super. He came on to talk about that. Absolutely superb.
His book on Midway, Lincoln's. There's just so many Decisions at Sea.
Sorry.
That's all right. We can just tell everybody, hey, we're going to talk about Craig Simons for an hour, and they won't be bored.
Not at all.
Getting back to what you said, I think it did change the war, to be honest with you, because, when you look at the situation, Lee is maybe technically not undefeated. It depends on how you interpret Antietam.
Sure.
It certainly wasn't a decisive victory on McClellan's part when it could have been. So you've really got this expertly trained army in no small part thanks to McClellan, but they can't win. It's like your favorite baseball team is built to get in the playoffs and they're going to finish fourth. And I think that the ramifications of a Lee victory in Pennsylvania are enormous. Where does he go next? Does he go to Philadelphia, Baltimore, or D.C.? Is this the straw that breaks the North's back in terms of patience with the war? Could it have ended the war with a negotiated settlement? We will never know, thank God. But I really think that it is that measure of importance, and a lot of the credit for that should go to Meade.
Let me ask a dumb question, not implying that you are, implying that it's a dumb question on my behalf because the answer is so obvious, and that is how much has the impact of the victory at Gettysburg been magnified by the Gettysburg Address that took place November 19th, 1863, so 4 months later?
That's not a dumb question at all. In fact, might be one of the best ones we tackle today because they go hand in glove. Lincoln can't make that speech if the Army of the Potomac doesn't defeat Lee. And he gives Lincoln this wonderful opportunity to come to the battlefield at the dedication of the cemetery. And it was not a perfunctory, we have to invite the president. They knew they were going to invite him, and they knew he would be concluding remarks. I don't think anybody knew how brief the remarks would be or how stunning and magnificent the remarks would be.
Well, the photographers at the ceremony
Yeah,
certainly didn't know.
no, they're,
What a shame.
granted that they didn't have cell phones or little Kodak brownies, but man, they couldn't, there's that famous picture and we have it in the book. You can hardly see him. You need like a red arrow or something to point.
Right.
This is where he is. And I love the fact that while he got, about five different bursts of applause, that when he sat down, it was kind of quiet. And a journalist leans over that's sitting next to him and goes, "Is that it?" And Lincoln quietly goes, "For now." And so they go hand in, I think, Mr. Vane, they go hand in glove.
Well, they can't. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I always, when people talk about how poisonous modern politics is and how rabid and judgmental and, let's say somewhat hateful the news media can be, I always send them the article from was in the Chicago Tribune, the
Mm-hmm.
flat. Tell us, just finish real quick, but it's their review of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
Mm-hmm.
How'd they describe it?
Not as well as one would have liked.
Flat,
But
dishwatery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the president
that
of the United States.
as fellow Pennsylvanians, you don't have to go to Chicago. The Lancaster, and I believe a paper from Harrisburg that had Democratic sympathies. They laid into it too. What a waste of time! For God's sakes, couldn't we get somebody else that could speak? Our politics has always been that way. There's give and take. There's times when our politicians find the better angels of our nature and theirs. This just ain't one of them.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. We are discussing the book Three Roads to Gettysburg with author Tim McGrath. Tim, by your grace. Tim, let's set the stage here a little bit. Let's start with the three men, and then we can talk about the war, and then we can hit Gettysburg.
Okay.
Let's do them in alphabetical order. Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee, first, the son of a Revolutionary War hero and someone that George Washington wanted to do more time mentoring, but Lee turned down a chance to be his aide and said he was wedded to his sword. A brilliant cavalry officer with a temptation to be cruel at times. He's a Federalist in Virginia, which is a bit rare, but elected to the governorship. But he's also he's that favorite uncle you have in the family, just don't lend him any money. Uh, he he went through, his money. There was a story about, he needed to borrow a horse from a fellow at the next plantation, and the gentleman sends a horse over brought by one of his enslaved men. 3 weeks later, the enslaved man returns, and the plantation owner goes, "Well, where's the horse?" And he says, "Well, General Lee sold the horse." "Well, why didn't you come back?" "Well, he sold me too." And, he spends time in debtor's prison, and then ironically, right before the War of 1812 is taking place, he goes with some other Federalists to Baltimore, which is a hotbed of war hawks, to try to defend the newspaper. He's part of a group that's attacked and brought out into the street and stabbed with pocket knives and has hot candle wax poured into his eyes, and comes back not only broken physically, disfigured, but also in spirit as well, and goes to the Caribbean and into the islands. And young Robert is like 5 years old, and he's on his way back home 6 years later when he dies near Savannah. So Lee is part of this amazing extended Virginia family, but with very little in the way of finances. And it's his mother who helps get him into West Point and whom he's taking care of. When he leaves, she says to a sister, I believe, "What am I going to do without Robert? He is both son and daughter to me for all his time taking care." And then, of course, he graduates with no demerits, only the one of two West Pointers that did that. Unfortunately for him, the other one was in the same class, so he graduates second in his class and then goes on to become quite a brilliant engineer and Mexican War hero.
A lot of it's made of Robert E. Lee's dance in 60, 61. He's famous for the John Brown raid that he leads and ends Brown's sort of insurrection, if that's the right term. Winfield Scott wants Lee to be commander in chief, for like general in chief of the Union forces. Lee says, "I can't draw my sword against my native state," and starts the war out not auspiciously, by the way, either
Yeah.
either on the field or in Richmond. But in early 62, he comes on the scene in a way that completely changes the course of the war.
He does, and it's talk about a person in history meeting the moment. He's taking risks. He's up against a far superior army in terms of size, but he knew McClellan from the Mexican War. In fact, at one time he caught him outside of the boundaries of the grounds and like, "What are you doing out here?" And I'm sorry, I'll come back. But if you look at the 7 days battles, Mr. Vane, and you know this, technically almost all of them are a Confederate defeat, except for one fact: McClellan keeps moving back. And then the most interesting is the last battle, Malvern Hill, where McClellan's well fortified up on a hill, and Lee orders frontal assaults that are disastrous. It still ends with McClellan ending his campaign, but at the same time, it's the first lesson in the war that Lee's present at, in which, you don't assault the higher ground, and expect to just take things over.
Lee also has a series of victories after the 7 days. You mentioned Malvern Hill, and I remember in graduate school a lot of attention being paid to Gaines Mill, the Battle of Gaines Mill, where they sort of broke through, the Confederates broke through the Union lines. After the 7 days battles, he goes on to win Second Manassas decisively.
Yep.
And he invades the North for the first time, and suffers sort of a tactical draw at Antietam, but a strategic defeat because he has to retire. Then in May of 63, he destroys Hooker at Chancellorsville, or let's say considerably defeats Hooker at Chancellorsville, but he also loses Stonewall Jackson. And I like your detailing of what that meant for Lee. So it's the summer of 63. Robert E. Lee is poised to do something bold to take the Confederate Army north again. And if you don't mind, we'll leave that there and talk about President Lincoln. Now, most of the people who listen to the podcast are very familiar with Lincoln. What is Lincoln's mindset in the summer of 63 as defeat after defeat hits the Union Army, and now he has to face this new threat?
It's a good question. I think Lincoln would sum it up with a line he delivered to a friend a few months earlier. If there is a hell on earth, I am in it. And each time he makes the new choice to lead the Army of the Potomac, you can tell in his writings that there's a glimmer of hope that this might be the guy that can do it. And if you count the Army of Virginia, as John Pope called it, he's over McDowell, McClellan, Pope, McDowell again, or McClellan again, I'm sorry. Burnside, disastrous at Fredericksburg. And then Chancellorsville is his textbook victory. He's has less than half the amount of soldiers that Hooker has. And yet with Jackson, he comes up with an attack plan and feints and putting 10,000 men in Fredericksburg to hold something at bay. At one point, I think against Hooker's 100,000 plus, Lee's marching around with an army less than 15,000 men. And it really is one of the great tactical victories of all time. But he does lose Stonewall Jackson, as your listeners know, shot by his own men and dies of pneumonia a week later. And, Lee's looking at issues of things. Jefferson Davis wants him to go to Vicksburg. He wants him to detach half the army and, go to try to relieve the siege. And Lee doesn't want to do that at all. He's looking at, we've got momentum here and let's move north while we can. And he's got 75,000 men. And he's all set to do that because he thinks that's the best way to not just defeat the North, but end the war.
And so Lincoln is groping for yet another commander. Lincoln has, on the east, of course, seen defeat after defeat. Things are going moderately better in the west. He has diplomatic problems. He has economic problems. He has intra-cabinet problems. His wife isn't a particularly helpful figure. They had lost their son, Willie, in the previous year. Really, nothing's going right for him. And he needs a new commander because Lee is on the move. He doesn't have faith in Hooker. Of course, as Hooker famously said, Hooker didn't have faith in Hooker.
Yep.
How does Lincoln and the War Department and everybody who gets to make these sort of decisions or have input, how did they land on George Gordon Meade?
They landed on Meade, I think, more by necessary and happenstance. Lincoln was very partial to another Pennsylvania generals. Most of your listeners probably know, viewers probably know, John Reynolds, who also was a good friend of Meade's, but he's already said he's not interested. Halleck and Lincoln send a Colonel Hardy, who's also an acquaintance of Meade's, to Frederick, Maryland in the dead of night, and he wakes up Meade at 4:30 in the morning to tell him that he's now the new commander of the Army of the Potomac. Meade, ironically, thinks he's being arrested because he'd gotten into an argument a couple weeks before with Hooker. When Hooker had a council of war with his generals after the day 3 at Chancellorsville, Meade's going, we got more men than they do. Let's fight. He wanted to fight them.
I
And
love that tidbit. I've known that for decades, and I just think that's so great.
yeah, and Hooker's like, and he actually writes down the dialogue, I told you I wanted to fight. And he goes, well, I changed that because I thought you changed your mind after this conversation. And Meade's like, the hell I did. So he's past disagreement and walking a fine line or stepping over the line of insubordination. So he really thinks they're going to arrest me. There goes my career. And instead, you almost wonder too, the way he writes back to his wife that, well, they gave this to me. Is the good news he's put in command of the army, or is the good news he would have been arrested and out of the army? There's just that flip right there
Like,
where you see. But Meade's wonderful. His
talk a little bit more about his background because of the three men who are part of your subtitle, he's obviously the least known. How did George Gordon Meade come to be in the military during the Civil War at all?
Well, he's the son of a fellow Richard Worsham Meade, who's the third generation of Philadelphia merchants. But this guy is the Elon Musk of Philadelphia business during the early years of the United States. He's this wonderkind who's moved to Cadiz. Meade's actually born in Spain because he's developed so many great business deals here. In real money time, if you took his fortune and put it in today's, Richard Meade is a multi-billionaire. And he's very happy with these. He has the artwork from the Spanish artists. He's got a library that uh, rivals Jefferson's, and he makes Jefferson aware of that. He's a real hard driver. He doesn't have any tact at all. And Madison and Jefferson are not fans. And he winds up going to prison after he lends his fortune to the Spanish government to get through the Napoleonic Wars in Spain, and then makes such a hash out of trying to get it back that he's thrown in jail twice. And when he returns, he's unable, the government won't give him the money after the Monroe and Adams deal to purchase Florida. They've made a promise that, we'll pay, a couple $1 million on American debts. Well, he's owed $500,000, and they're not going to give 25% of the money to, one guy. So he winds up dying also when Meade is young. He's 12 or 13 years old, and he's in a prep school in Philadelphia, and that ends. And it's his mother, Margaret. Meade also married a lady named Margaret, who sends him to West Point. He would like to be a lawyer or a doctor, but she can't afford to send him to a college. He can't go to Princeton. He can't go to Penn. And while at West Point, he discovers that he's got a wonderful talent for engineering. And you could write a whole book about his engineering career. He uh, designed and surveyed and then built lighthouses from New Jersey down to the Florida Keys, a lot of which are still standing. That's how good they are. So you've got this guy who understands the high ground. He distinguished himself in the Mexican War. He's doing a new survey of the Great Lakes that's groundbreaking, no pun intended. And when the war comes, and he's a very good general. You were talking about, Lee almost breaking through in the 7 days, Gaines Mill. Meade's this close to breaking Lee's line at Fredericksburg, but he doesn't have any reinforcements. So, and also, Mr. Vane, you read about George Meade in the very first or second paragraph, they bring out that quote, he's a goggle-eyed old snapping turtle. This guy was a raconteur. He was a great storyteller. He had a good temper, and he knew how and when to use it. Ask Dan Sickles that. But this is a guy that was much more animated and liked. He wasn't some sourpuss grunt by any means.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies. Our guest today, Tim McGrath. We're discussing his new book, Three Roads to Gettysburg, Meade, Lee, Lincoln, and the battle that changed the war, the speech that changed the nation. Title of this podcast is Leaders and Legends. So let me ask you, sir, do you have a particularly favorite Hoosier leader and or legend?
Of the three of these gentlemen,
No, just in all history, all of everybody in Indiana,
all
who's your
history,
fave?
favorite leader. That's a tough one. You have to go with Lincoln, and at the same time, I'm torn between Robert Kennedy, Jackie Robinson, people who are really both brave and farsighted and a bit courageous. I'll go a step further and we can jump back to whatever you want to discuss. But Friday, I went to the Coles lecture at the University of Delaware, where Congresswoman Sarah McBride spoke. And you want to talk about Lincoln or how Lincoln looked at politics. She got into the fact that there have been some rather conservative Republicans that would comment to her at a hearing or on the floor of the House, Mr. McBride, and that she's taken some flack by not fighting back. And she mentioned in that if I go back and say, well, the hell with you or something like that, then there's no chance for a relationship there at all. But she said at each time something like that occurred, there would be a couple of Republican congressmen or women that would come up and say, we're not all this way. So she said, I'm happy to announce that I have sponsored or co-sponsored more bills in my first year in Congress than anyone else in my member of this particular Congress, but all of them have had a Republican co-sponsor or I've co-sponsored. I mean, if that isn't what Lincoln said, about winning, you have to win friends to get ahead in politics. I don't know what is. So let's throw her in the mix too.
As the Army of the Potomac marches under Meade to is pursuing. I always find it interesting that the Confederate Army had to go south to hit Gettysburg, and
Yeah.
the Northern Army came from the south to hit Gettysburg. Uh, is there a sense in the country, technology being what it was at the time, was there a sense in the country like this is it, this is the big one?
Yes, there is. How far it could expand westward, the papers would get into the events maybe 2 or 3 days later, if yeah, unless they were able to wire things in the north, certainly easier than the south. But I really do think so. If you look at the July 2nd front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer, it's major caps of what's going on there, and the reporters are very good. I mean, they have their readers on the edge of their seats. Not that they wouldn't be, because if we lose this battle, what's going to happen to us? But I think that there really was that kind of a touch and go with what was going on at the battle, and the fact that Meade had to pursue Lee into the North to get in that fight. And I like your point about they come in from opposite ends. How many of your viewers will remember the electric map at Gettysburg, where
Awesome.
it's the first thing that they mentioned, and then afterwards, remember, you are here, the white light at the Gettysburg Visitor Center. That became an in joke with my kids when we took them to Gettysburg, and still to this day, where are we going? Oh, you were at the white light. So,
Very. Matter of fact, let me change. My favorite battlefield to visit, and part of the is because it's so easy to understand and visualize, is Antietam. But
mhm.
no battlefield. I mean, maybe Normandy. No battlefield is done,
Yeah.
is commemorated and explained as well as Gettysburg is. It's a phenomenal friend of mine named Bill Benner who listens to this podcast occasionally.
Mhm.
He's 70 some years old. He just went there for the first time and he goes, it's absolutely unbelievable. He was still people are taken aback by it.
Yeah. I'll put in a plug for Jennifer Murray again, because she wrote a really good book on this great battlefield. And it's the history of the battlefield of Gettysburg. It's not the battle, but what people have done to move things forward, and, the towers come down and this. And one of the most interesting things that she put in is that they changed the theme from the high water mark to a new birth of freedom recently,
Mhm.
that we're, instead of looking at the past, we're now looking at the present and the future as far as what the battle and the address, mean to our country.
One of to understand to me to understand the Battle of Gettysburg, how and when and why it was fought, it's important to understand Lee's opinion of his troops and Lee's confidence. Tell the Leaders and Legends podcast, please, a little bit about how Lee felt in the condition of the Confederate Army, and we'll get to the Potomac, but the Army of the Potomac, but the condition in the sort of esprit de corps of the Confederates as they marched north.
It's a good question, Mr. Vane. The Army of Northern Virginia was already becoming legendary on both sides of the Atlantic. The foreign reporters, particularly in England, talking about this army that just seems invincible. And they aren't. They're not all wearing gray. They've got gray and butternut, whatever they can find for clothing. They're not as well equipped weapon wise. They did whatever Lee wanted them to do, and the telling point of that is July the 3rd. But at the same time, he really believed they were invincible. And I think he also believed that he was invincible. You win, you win, you win. I don't want to compare it because it's a battle and lives were lost, but it's almost like a certain football team that wins a Super Bowl and they're 8-2, and all of a sudden they're 8-5 right now. That did you stop understanding that you got there by fighting? It's easy to sit in a chair right now and talk about that, but I think Lee had total faith in his men and his generals.
In his quote, and I'm going to get most of this right, some of it wrong, but basically to paraphrase, men will accomplish anything if properly led. And I thought that
Yes.
the end of that quote to me was the most important, that he had confidence in himself in a
Hmm.
way that the Union generals in the East didn't have. I mean, McClellan had misplaced confidence. Hooker had confidence until, he actually had to fight. Burnside didn't want to be the commander of the Army of the Potomac, and I think they offered it
Yeah.
to him again, and he said no again. Like he didn't want any part of it. You mentioned Reynolds. Pope was there, then he was shipped off to Minnesota. So just in terms of leadership, the difference between the armies is so stark. Let's talk about the Army of the Potomac because it seems like they tried to bridge the gap between esprit de corps and leadership with better weapons, better food, better logistics. The list goes on and on. Talk about the Army of the Potomac leading up to July 1st through 3rd.
Well, that's a good question. I like your comment about, Lee and saying if better led, and it worked for Lee until the 3rd of July at this stage. The army that Meade took over an army that a year earlier didn't really exist in July or 2 years earlier in 61. And McClellan made that army. Give the devil his due. They were well trained. He was a great person at instilling belief in yourself, and the army really felt that they could do it. And they just never had a leader that could see things through. McClellan can win at Antietam and he doesn't. Hooker has this great plan and he says that Lee must either get clobbered or ingloriously fly. And, as you said, I just lost faith in Joe Hooker, said Joe Hooker. But I think they didn't, I think the Army of the Potomac didn't have time are we going to like this guy or not? They're going into a battle on the third day he's in command. And, I think I think the fact that they saw after the first day that they were going to stay put where they wound up, with a great story about Reynolds having seen that ground a year earlier. They stayed after the second day when they were almost turned in no small measure due to Sickles, and to a point to Meade for not chastising Sickles earlier.
Should have been
Uh,
arrested.
yeah, but also he had more time. He could have probably pulled them back before he even left. There's that conjecture about Sickles leaving his position, and uh, and then staying put, and them turning Lee back that day. And so I think Meade won the Army's confidence in those 3 days. And I don't know if he ever lost it, but certainly to Lincoln and to members of Congress. And Sickles and a cadre of generals, as you know, and I'm sure most of your viewers do, a couple, and his companions, Butterfield, Doubleday, Hooker, that made Meade's life hell for the rest of his life.
The first day of the Battle of Gettysburg is really all about as you just said, standing, fighting, recognizing geography, topography. How did the first day, where not that many troops were engaged, I mean, compared to to July
Mhm.
2nd and 3rd, how did the first day set the stage for what followed?
Good question. As most of your readers know, neither Lee nor Meade were there at all that day. Lee arrives late in the afternoon, and Meade gets there sometime after 10 in the evening or before midnight. But the Army of the Potomac's basically fighting a cold ground pullback throughout it. Reynolds arrives early, and like I said, he had reconnoitered that area a year before for the governor of Pennsylvania. And I reading his notes and everything about that, I thought about that story about Wellington at Waterloo when he was being criticized before the battle started. Why are we here? He says, because I saw this ground last year and I kept it in my pocket. And I think Reynolds did the same thing. And Meade trusted Reynolds, and then after Reynolds died, sent the other general he trusted most, Winfield Scott Hancock, and trusted them implicitly. And the irony of it is that the Army of Northern Virginia drives what Army of the Potomac soldiers are at Gettysburg that day right to the grounds that Reynolds wanted everybody to fight on.
One of those serendipitous, let's
Yeah,
say, moments. The night of the July 1st, most of the rest of the two armies has come up. But for the Confederate Army, the Army of Northern Virginia, there is a critical element that has not yet arrived and wouldn't arrive for another day, or at least till the end of that day. What is that element, and what did its absence have as an impact on the battle and how Lee fought it?
good question. I'm sure most of your viewers and listeners know that we're talking about Jeb Stuart and the fact that the cavalry were absent for almost all of Lee's invasion northward. Lee had given him some degree of leeway, but still instructions to keep him informed. Stuart had been caught off guard on June 9th at Brandy Station in Virginia by Pleasanton's cavalry, and he doesn't lose that battle. The North doesn't win it. Neither one does, but it was embarrassing to Stuart, who was used to having all of these successes. So he's looking at this as a chance to go around the Army of the Potomac once again and more of a joyride than his scouting assignment. So there's a lot to be said for did Stuart cost Lee the battle with what some people think. I'm not sure that's accurate, but he shows up towards the end of the second day and about 150 wagons. And General Lee, I've brought you all these wagons. And Lee said, I don't need them. I need you. And yet, ironically, part of the third day's battle, which doesn't get much notice or plans, was for Stuart to ride around behind the lines, and if they break through and Stuart can come through, then Lee's plan is he's divided the Union Army in half, and he's stopped by the Union cavalry in no small part due to a hotshot Michigan general named Custer.
Oh, we got to give Custer some due, some part of it.
Oh, you do. I mean, look, he did it. He's like uh, if, Greg Irwin, who's a wonderful historian at Temple, a great military historian, his first book was called Custer Victorious. And I once asked him, what got you interested in history? What got you interested in the Civil War? And he goes, that's easy. They died with their boots on with
Boots
Errol
on.
Flynn. And he said, I've got my friends all interested. And we're going, come on, you Wolverines, playing it like at 8 or 10.
They died with their boots on isn't as historically inaccurate as Braveheart, but it's certainly way up in the running for sure.
Now, that's a close run, kiddo. That's a close run.
Day two, the Battle of Gettysburg, is romanticized in different ways than day three. I'd like to start the discussion of day two and day three by throwing in the name of my favorite general of the war, and that is James Longstreet. And one of my favorite books is William Garrett Piston's Lee's Tarnished Lieutenant. A
Yes,
beautiful,
it is.
terrific book.
It really is.
It's probably been 30 years since I read it, but it really shaped my thinking along with Lee Considered and The Marble Man by Thomas
Hmm.
Connolly.
Yeah.
Uh, Longstreet is commander of the First Corps. He's the highest ranking lieutenant general in the Army. Even was promoted one day before Stonewall Jackson. He's alive. Stonewall Jackson is dead. Longstreet has a long, distinguished military career, West Point, Mexican War.
Yeah.
He's also best man for Ulysses S. Grant when Ulysses S. Grant marries his Longstreet's cousin, Julia Dent. Longstreet goes to Gettysburg and he has a plan in his mind as to how any battle should be fought. What was his idea, his tactical idea as to how the battle should be fought? And how did that clash? And clash is the right word
Yeah.
with Lee's ideas.
It's a great question. Longstreet has been, and writes himself, and history's been writing, corroborating it, that he thought the whole plan was we will invade the North, but we will fight a defensive battle. We will fight a Fredericksburg style battle if we can, or something close to it. And that's what he's thinking. And so he's a bit surprised on the morning of July 2nd that Lee's come up with an offensive plan to attack Meade on his left. And Longstreet's none too happy about it. And to some people, he makes his opinion known, to some he doesn't. Whether or not that delayed the actions till 4 in the afternoon uh, is up for conjecture, but he wasn't well led. The officer that had done the scouting apparently hadn't done the scouting, so it took a while for them to get into place. But at the same time, twice, Longstreet sees a couple of things to do. One is, hey, we won the July 1st. If the battle ended on July 1st, it's a Southern victory. Hey, we won that. Let's head east. Let them chase us. Let them chase us till we get to higher ground and they have to attack us. And Lee is very confident and adamant. The enemy is there and I'm going to fight him. He's either I'm going to whip him here or he's going to whip me. And
So
Longstreet,
those people,
yes, those
those
people.
people. And
Yeah.
Longstreet he wanted the Army of Northern Virginia to be between the Army of the Potomac and Washington, D.C. The
Yeah.
Confederates knew that Lincoln was absolutely apoplectic at any thought that D.C. would be attacked or let alone be captured. Longstreet, he paid a price for the rest of his life. As somebody put it, an author, and I can't think of who it was or is, Longstreet Longstreet argued with Lee at Gettysburg. He was right and he was wrong for the rest of his life. The Confederates never forgave him for being a Republican. He wasn't
Yep.
from Virginia. He was from Georgia, so he wasn't part of that Virginia dynasty sort of mentality. But
Yes.
but looking back at it as a historian who studied the battle, and I talked to Alan Gelzo about it as well, I think Longstreet was right, and Lee
Yeah.
just lost patience.
I think so too. I think, and Longstreet, was it part of his post-war to vindicate himself because he was in command of the major attacking forces on July 2nd and July 3rd. So they could say, well, he didn't follow through, but he was following Lee's orders to do so. And we tend to forget July 2nd, First Corps gets this close to punching the lines.
Mhm.
And while it's not enough men to have broken the line with Armistead, they did break the line of just for a minute or two.
That's right.
They did succeed, so they got that close. But I think you're exactly right, Mr. Vane, that Longstreet didn't do himself any favors with his comments and writings after the war, and then I guess if he was going to serve in Grant's administration, Grant did him a favor sending him to Turkey, because if he'd been sent anywhere close to the United States, might have caught a little bit more trouble.
Well, we could do a whole podcast on my love for Longstreet and how he was wronged and how
Sign me up.
you notice that, he didn't no one really started to attack him, whether it was Jubal Early or Parson Pendleton or Gordon, until after Lee dies.
Well, what do you think about this story about Longstreet when all's said and done and they're finished here? And Lee is looking at, I mean, his army's been slammed to pieces, if that not maybe not destroyed, but crippled. But Longstreet's the one that says, "We're up here. Let's go someplace else and fight another battle where we can fight the battle I know you want to fight," is how he
Right.
put it. So I'm paraphrasing to Lee.
Well, you mentioned Fredericksburg and Marie's Heights.
Yep.
Longstreet sighted and placed the artillery and chose the ground, and just it's in a lot of ways it's the most magnificent defensive battle of the war. And
Yes.
Burnside, of course, God love him, he doesn't know what the hell he's doing, and it shows. And you're right about the second day that the Confederates did break that line, that they then attacked closely the next day. But Longstreet had an understanding of technology
Yes.
that Lee perhaps either didn't have or ignored. And I think, and correct me because it's been like legit 25 years or so, the diaries of the Northern generals, the Battle of Gettysburg, they expected Lee to do what Longstreet was asking Lee to do.
Yes. Yes. I think it was a couple of, but the one who didn't expect that was Meade. Meade saw the ground, he saw what was going on. These are both 2 successful engineers. Do we have a minute to get into Lee as an engineer?
Please do.
My favorite story of Lee that I didn't know about until this, he's a young lieutenant and he's sent to St. Louis in the late 1830s. Do you know this story? And St. Louis is in danger of becoming dry docked, that the flow of the Mississippi is shifting further and further away from the city. And there's been different ideas. Oh, we've got to dam things here and dam things there. And it's a forerunner for Lee. He's given just fewer men than he needs and less money than he wants. And he decides that the problem is up in Iowa. It's the rapids up in Iowa that are causing this change. So he dynamites or blows up little avenues in the rapids up along the Iowa, coastline, and then, everything comes fine. A lot of speculators from Illinois are ticked off because they're buying the land on the other side of St. Louis because if the river's going to shift that way. But here's this guy. Historians and biographers always talk about that those 2 trips down the Mississippi to New Orleans as a young man
Yeah,
changed Lincoln. Lee shows up and he changes the Mississippi.
incredible. Incredible. That's one of my favorite stories. You do a terrific job in describing it. We are discussing on the Leaders and Legends podcast the new book, Three Roads to Gettysburg. Our guest is author Tim McGrath. The third day, the sort of high water mark, as you mentioned a few minutes ago. When you are a history nerd, like I think you and I both are, and I say that
Mhm.
as a compliment.
Thank you. I
And
agree with you.
and I have the opportunity to talk to all these amazing historians on the podcast and public officials. As a matter of fact, you mentioned Robert Kennedy earlier. I'm going to be posting a podcast in a few weeks based on an interview I did with Christopher Matthews, who wrote a new book.
Oh, it's a new book.
Yeah, his new book on Robert Kennedy. Anyway, I'm always surprised when really smart people, accomplished people, do something so insanely dumb. And you encounter it all throughout history. Doesn't matter which country, which century. When I talk to, we're big boosters of Richard Nixon on the Leaders and Legends podcast, Mr. McGrath. So please don't hold that against us.
Not at all.
But we have, when you read about Watergate, you're like, I cannot freaking believe this is going to
Yes.
happen. Like, it's going to happen, but you just can't believe it. That's the feeling I get on the third day of Gettysburg, where it's like, this guy is a genius. He's brilliant. And he's getting ready to do something that I just can't fathom. And, you mentioned about being on the battlefield. If you're out on the battlefield and you look both, heading facing the Confederates and then facing the Army of the Potomac, you throw your hands up and go like, it's 90 degrees. Oh my God. And what are they thinking? What point did the men have given all they've given? And Lee is just convinced they've got more to give.
Yep. He actually has. I'm going to sidestep that for a minute. I don't mind you saying, you're a fan of Nixon's at all. Let's be clear. If a Democratic president had come up with the Environmental Protection Agency, had recognized at that point in history, read China, had imposed wage and price controls when inflation was maybe going to 5%, they have said, "This is my kind of guy." But it was Nixon. If you're a Democrat, he couldn't do anything right. And he had a nice nerve with me because I was a student volunteer for Robert Kennedy and was told by my dad I didn't have to get a summer job if I wanted to tag along that summer. And obviously that sadly didn't happen. But you're absolutely right about Lee. What was he thinking? And you can see that in Longstreet's whole approach and how it's the most diplomatic WTF you ever read is Longstreet's explanation of the third day of Gettysburg.
And what is Meade doing? He decides to stay, unlike McClellan, unlike others he's not withdrawing after the first day. First day you said was clearly a Confederate. Victory is the right term. It certainly wasn't dispositive, but a Confederate success.
Sure.
Second day, Confederates come oh so close. But Meade, instead of saying, well, look, we got to do something else, we got to protect, oh my God, it's Lee, he stays.
Yes.
What's Lee doing on the night of July 2nd?
What's Lee doing on the night?
Forgive me. I'm sorry. What's Meade doing on the night of July 2nd, 1863?
He's been commander of the army for less than 5 days, let alone a week, and he holds a council of war in this tiny little house, the Leicester House. I'm sure you and a lot of your viewers have been there. And he asks everybody, should they stay or go? And almost to a man, they're all like saying we should go. Dan Butterfield, who's the chief of staff that Meade inherited and didn't have enough time to replace, because he does get replaced, and because Meade had already taken his command of Butterfield's corps, months earlier, is also along with Sickles. Oh, he wanted to retreat. What they don't realize that Meade had sent a wire that the telegraph was still cut, but saying we're staying. And as it's over and they leave deciding that, he goes to young John Gibbon. Now, Meade was a lieutenant and Gibbon was a shaved-tail lieutenant years ago in Florida when Meade's on this little expedition in Gibbon's camp, and he's cold and he's freezing and everything else, and Gibbon gives him, use that tent. Here's a blanket. Let's get you some coffee and some more food. So they go back a ways. And as they're walking out the door, Meade says to Gibbon, if he attacks tomorrow, he's coming after you because Gibbon's in the dead center of the line. And Gibbon says, why? And he goes, because he's attacked on our left, he's attacked on our right. So he's going to think we spread the troops too thin for the center. Meade knew, like you were talking about, did the other generals think that he would not do this, but Meade knew he would.
How close did the Confederates come to breaking the Union line during Pickett's charge? And let's say they had, what in your view would have come next?
Well, they break the line. Can I call you Robert or Bob instead
Please
of Mr.
call me.
Bain?
Yes, absolutely.
Which do you
Please.
prefer?
Robert's just fine, sir.
I got it. Thanks, Robert. I think they broke with maybe a couple hundred men, if that many. So they broke the line, but they didn't break the line for good. I think it's almost one of those what if questions that really you don't have to ask because it wasn't going to happen. The enfilade from the sides of Pickett's charge were taking their toll, and how smart Hunt and Meade were with the bombardments. Stop firing back at the Rebs. Let's let them, if they want to do this, let's open
That's right.
give them the welcome, open the gate. And so I don't really think even had Stewart been able to puncture, I still think that there were still, people forget Sedgwick's got a corps that hasn't seen battle yet.
That's right.
And Meade can snap his fingers and they'll go anywhere to plug the gap.
Give the Leaders and Legends podcast audience just a kind of short review of what happens. Actually, hold that question just for a second. Forgive me. What's the reaction in Washington, D.C., in the Lincoln administration, in the White House, when the news of the Union victory at Gettysburg finally is announced, gets to them?
Lincoln's been haunting the telegraph office next to the War Department, which he's been doing through the whole war. It's like almost his second home. I almost wondered if Mary Todd was thinking maybe I'll just send his dinners over there. But he doesn't get the word till mid-morning on the 4th. And like everyone else, he's elated. He has he sends a congratulatory telegram. He's unbeknownst to him so far, he's not realizing that while this is going on the 4th of July, that John Pemberton, another Philadelphian, another Pennsylvanian, who also was a friend of Meade's, is surrendering Vicksburg. In fact, Meade had a sister who had married a rich Southerner and had lost at least one son in the Civil War fighting for the Confederacy. Lee's euphoric. The army is
Lincoln. Lincoln's euphoric.
Lincoln's euphoric.
That's all right.
Thanks. We're even now. Uh, but but Lincoln is also hoping, now if he can just counterattack or attack Lee and crush him and pin him, we've got him. And in fact, Meade thought about counterattacking right after Pickett's charge, and he's literally talked out of it because the men are spent. And of course, there's the famous letter days later when Lee has escaped that Lincoln writes and said, "You had him in your grasp and you let him go." And then Lincoln, as per his wisdom and it's out of my system, then writes, "Never signed, never sent." But I often wonder, Robert, you know, Lincoln had visited battlefields in Virginia, and he could easily taken the train to Gettysburg and met and seen that. If he had seen that battlefield and realized that Meade lost 25% of his men, and there were thousands and thousands of horses that had died. The place looks like a World War I battlefield, after something.
And
And
you
I think
detail the weather, which I thought was a very important part of your
exactly,
book, like
it's humid, it's hot,
thunderstorms.
and the Northern Army hadn't been fed. The supply trains carrying food and water are shunted to the side because we need cannonballs, we need, munitions. And I think Lincoln would have had a much healthier idea of what Meade was dealing with right afterwards. And then is Meade wrong to attack Lee when he sets up the same exact defenses at Williamsport in Maryland that Meade had at Gettysburg? And Meade's like, I guess I have to do this. And a couple of the wiser generals talk him out of it. I don't think he needed much discussion, but because he wasn't a fool. But it was a missed opportunity, maybe, but with small letters. It wasn't a giant missed opportunity. He didn't have the men and the energy to do it.
Whatever criticism Meade experienced or took at the time, how has history and historians judged Meade's decision post Gettysburg?
I think for a while he was judged pretty harshly, and one of the reasons might be that the first general from this Battle of Gettysburg that Lincoln talked to was Dan Sickles, fresh into Washington with minus one leg. And this is a guy who, you know, anything that was said against him is fake news. We could spend 2 days on Sickles, so I'll shut up there on that front. He did go after him, so he lost this opportunity. It's as recent as the 70s in the Hal Holbrook miniseries, where he does a great job playing Lincoln. He gets the voice right, that cracky voice, but he's going, how the hell could he not do this and everything else? He didn't have the wherewithal to do it. And I think we're seeing Kent Masterson Brown's books on Meade at Gettysburg and his sequel about the efforts after Gettysburg point out very eloquently that Meade didn't have the overwhelming force it would take to have knocked Lee out once and for all.
A few months after the battle, President Lincoln is invited to give a few appropriate remarks, the dedication of the cemetery and the battlefield at Gettysburg. I read Gary Will's book, Lincoln at Gettysburg. Yep. It was superb.
Mhm.
I confess not to understanding all of it, at least following all of it, I should say. I had to read some pages more than once, but it's a phenomenal book about the speech and how it was constructed and the sort of historical and rhetorical origins of it. Lincoln famously very rarely left Washington, D.C., never went west. Jefferson Davis went west many times. Why did Lincoln decide to go to Gettysburg?
I think he saw it as an opportunity, and not just to make a speech, but really to genius. It's impossible to not fall in love with this guy when you get involved in his letters and things. And it had me laughing because there's two or three passages about the Mississippi or sickles from Mark Twain in this book. So if your book's got voluminous quotations of Lincoln's and Mark Twain, the only thing you can hope for is to be the best writer in the book. But but for Lincoln to put together the 271, 264, pick the speech, the
The
version he
version,
wants.
yeah.
He used the Declaration of Independence and that phrase, all men are created equal. That was his North Star,
It
not
was the
just for his
Declaration. That's
politics,
right.
but for his life. And all of a sudden, here's this opportunity to take that comment from 4 score and 7 years earlier and say it applies to today. And he welds all men are created equal with a new birth of freedom. And we've been each generation since then has been trying to live up to that, or in some cases, some leaders live down. But he's really set the bar for who are we as a people if we don't live up to that. And that's what that speech is about. And that's why I think it is the battle that changed the war, and it is the speech that changed the nation.
Did you have to memorize it as a kid? You're a few years older than me.
No, but I will tell you, my sophomore speech class teacher had us memorize Caesar's Mark Antony's oration, and
Funeral oration.
I didn't look at it until about 10 minutes before, which is the kind of student I was. So I went into friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise them. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred within bones. So let it be with Caesar. He was thrice offered as the king of the town, which he did thrice refuse. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that battle can be won. For a good time, call 302-555-1212 and ask for candy.
How the good old days where we had to memorize speeches and
Yep.
important documents. Grant comes east in early 1864, takes over command as a three-star general. Meade is still operationally in control of the Army of Potomac, but I think it's fair to say his command is diminished with Grant with him
Yes.
the entire time.
Sure.
They form a good partnership, probably better
Yes.
than most people would have thought. But I'm getting to, and I think this is right, April 10th, 1865. It's the day after the surrender at Appomattox, at which Meade is present. And the next day, the Confederate command and the Union command meet again to work out some details.
Yes.
Grant famously grabs the arms of Longstreet, embraces him. I think he says, let's have a game of brag like the old
Yeah.
days." But Meade and Lee have a chance to chat. And they
Yeah.
knew each other, they knew of each other. They had
Yeah.
obviously fought against each other. Talk about that moment and what Lee says to Meade, which is so, I think, gracious.
Sure. They had met in Mexico when Meade was actually a few weeks or days from being sent back home after his service under Zachary Taylor, and they meet near Veracruz. So they've known each other. And like you said, Meade was not at Appomattox Courthouse. He was with the Army. So he's the one that gets to tell the Army. And of course, I think if you give him a choice, do you want to be the one to ride along with your troops that you've been under your command, technically at least, this past couple of years, or to be in the courthouse? He would have said, I'd rather be with the soldiers. But when he sees Lee says to him, you've certainly got some gray in your beard. And Meade famously replies, you have to answer for a lot of it.
I love that exchange.
Me too.
Gettysburg has gone down in history as one of the most important battles, not only in the United States and America, but world history. Before we started recording, I made my comment, which I'm going to allow you to either wholeheartedly support or intellectually dismiss. To me, in terms of how the war was fought, when it ended, how it ended, who was responsible for ending it, who was responsible for the victory of the North and the defeat of the South. The Battle of Shiloh is to me the most critical battle of the war, even more than Gettysburg, even more than Vicksburg. How wrong am I?
I don't think you're wrong. I think, like with most of our history, sometimes you feel funny talking about and comparing battles where people are losing their lives and risking their lives with other parts of the culture or something like that. Who's your favorite baseball team? What was their best year? Who's your favorite movie or something like that? I had to do an oral report on Shiloh junior year in college for a stentorian professor when what I wanted to do was Chancellorsville, but I got Shiloh. And digging into that more, you've got a good argument there because it is really the first major battle. And then ironically, the casualties at Shiloh within months or weeks are small potatoes on paper to what other battles and what's to come. But I think it was a battle that what would have happened if Albert Sidney Johnston had not been killed?
Or if he had lived and Grant had died.
Yeah. And what
It
happened?
cemented the relationship, the military command relationship between Grant and Sherman.
Yes.
It proved to Lincoln that he had generals who could fight.
Yep.
Again, Johnston dies, Lincoln, or excuse me, Grant doesn't. Grant is, of course, saved on the second day by Buell.
Yep.
But it was also, and I think I remember this statistic correct? More Americans were killed or wounded at Shiloh than in every military confrontation involving
Before then.
Americans before
Yep.
then.
Yes. That's true.
It showed, it proved, it convinced the American government and the Northern government. I guess we should say we are all Americans, right, Mr. Lincoln? The Northern government and the Union Army. This this ain't no 90-day war. This is
No,
going to go on, and it's going to be bloody and awful.
I agree. I
Uh,
agree.
I'll do one counterfactual before we ask you the same five questions that we ask all of our guests. Would Stonewall Jackson have found occupying the high ground practicable? How much did Lee not having Stonewall Jackson at Gettysburg change how it was fought and the outcome of the fighting?
Good question. That's a really great what if. And I think Jackson being Jackson, he would not have given a damn if they were on the high ground. That okay, they've got that ground, that's a given. There's nothing I can do about it. Now, how do we get them out of it? But I'll throw this back at you, you being a Longstreet fan. Would Jackson have been able to convince Lee to do what Longstreet said? Go around them. If we're going to stay here, faint like this, and let's get around. Once we're behind them, that high ground is lost.
We
Or
interposed between them, between the Army of the
Right.
Potomac and the
Okay.
Capitol.
Exactly. And I think that Jackson's opinion swayed Lee. That's a really neat question.
We've reached the point on the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same five questions of all of our guests. Tim McGrath, are you ready?
Yes.
What was your first job?
My first job was, let's see which one. I guess I could count cutting lawns from the time I was 14.
Most male guests do.
Yeah. So I'll stick with that. I was thinking about, lifeguard or swimming instructor, but that came a couple of years later. Yeah, cutting grass.
Paper delivery. Those are the three biggies.
Yeah.
Number two, what was your first concert?
The Beach Boys, February 65. And I thought Brian Wilson had bleached his hair, but it was turned out to be Glenn Campbell.
Speaking of brilliance, Glenn Campbell.
Yes.
If you could suggest any book for someone to read, third question. If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Fiction would be a toss-up between Treasure Island and Huckleberry Finn and The Great Gatsby. A nonfiction book, even if you don't read the whole thing, the first 40 pages of William Manchester's The Last Lion trilogy,
Mm.
just those first 40 pages is the best nonfiction, just the prose. It's phenomenal.
About Winston Churchill, who we've not had on the Leaders and Legends podcast. I'd like to say, but we've done several authors, several historians of Hitler of Churchill,
Churchill.
and admiration just grows for the man the more you read about him.
I had a kid's book that I gave to my son. It's still upstairs in his old bedroom. I got up at 3 in the morning to watch his funeral in January of 65. And when we were going through my mother-in-law's things, she was a Girl Scout leader before my wife had gotten old enough to be one, and found from 1954 a obviously franked letter, but it's framed in our living room. I am ever so grateful for your kind consideration of my 80th birthday, Winston Churchill.
Beautiful.
I'm a
Beautiful.
fan.
Did you go to Chartwell House?
Yes. No. I've been to London when I was 10, but I didn't get to Chartwell.
I'll send you a copy of a fabulous book. And the author came on the podcast to discuss, and it's Churchill basically detailing the meetings he had at his country house, Chartwell, before the war. You will love it. Absolutely love it.
Thank you.
This is a tough one. Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
Gettysburg Address.
Last one. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record just to chat, whom would you choose?
Wow. Living today. That's a tough one. And I'm holding you up.
That's what
So
editing's for. That's what
it-
editing's for. Don't worry about it.
I can't. Living today. I'm trying to think of someone that you would just pick their brain forever. Right now, I think I would say a member of John Lewis's family, because he was at so many places and involved with so many people during the 60s into the century. He had unbelievable challenges and went after everything with a degree of peace and character. So yeah, I would love to talk to a member of his family. I was going to mention Rachel Robinson, but
Oh yeah, she's still alive.
she's still alive.
Like 103, isn't she? She just had a
So
birthday or something.
yeah, let's say Rachel Robinson.
A beautiful person and a beautiful woman.
Oh,
I love
she was. Go ahead.
I loved her canned exchanges with Yogi Berra,
Oh yeah,
where she would say
she was
safe and he would say
out. Yes. And
You have
I didn't realize I was watching that kind of history, but my grandfather had that game on, and then got into a, this is good for him, good for him. And my dad's going, no, they tagged him out, and they didn't do instant replay back then. Yeah, Rachel Robinson, that's our pick, pal.
we're describing when Jackie Robinson famously stole home against the Yankees in the World Series. You can see it on YouTube, and you can see how upset Yogi Berra gets. But every time after the passing of Jackie Robinson, when Rachel Robinson, his widow, would see Yogi Berra at the Hall of Fame or some other event,
Yeah,
she would say safe, and he would just say out, and that's all they'd say to each other, and they just move on and do other things. But I thought it's just a beautiful kind of short exchange.
he was my first autograph, Jackie Robinson. He was working for Chock full of Nuts, and he was standing outside the Dodger dugout in May of '62. I did not say everybody's going to say to me, how come I didn't say Sandy Koufax? And it was because I don't think he would come to the dinner. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. I still want to be him when I grow up.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise. We are also a federally certified, veteran-owned small business. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. But for this one, we need to mention the kindness and brilliance of Peter Carmichael. We miss you, Pete.
Amen to that.
Our guest, Tim McGrath, author of 3 Roads to Gettysburg, Meade, Lee, Lincoln, and the Battle That Changed the War, the Speech That Changed the Nation. Shelby Foote famously said, if you want to understand the United States, you must understand the Civil War. And to understand why, especially the last few years of the Civil War, are so critical, so important, so dispositive. Read this book. You will enjoy it. Thank you, sir, very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Robert, very much. I don't think I've ever had a better time discussing a book.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.